Welcome everyone to another learning session. This is the second session in our overall Azure Cloud learning journey. A prerequisite for today's session is Cloud Computing 101 session, which is available in your Trainso portal as well as in the Trainso YouTube channel. So in Cloud Computing 101, you learned what cloud computing is in general. And today is the first class. You'll be learning about Azure and Azure architecture and Azure services. Azure Cloud 101 part 1, getting started with Azure Cloud core architecture components. The prerequisite, as I mentioned, is Cloud 101. So in 101, we learned a lot of things in general, not specific to Azure Cloud, starting from history of computing, bare metal, server virtualization, containers such as Docker, and container orchestration such as Kubernetes. Then we discussed road to cloud and beyond. We discussed how data centers of past became cloud and how cloud became serverless. We also discussed the advantages of cloud computing, effect on CapEx and OpEx. We discussed features of cloud: high availability, scalability, scale out, scale up, elasticity, fault tolerance, disaster recovery, low latency. Actually, these are not features of only cloud, as we discussed. These are features of any application, whether it is hosted on-premises or on cloud. But with respect to cost, you can save a lot by moving to cloud. And then we briefly discussed about data storage on cloud, file storage, block storage, object storage, relational databases, non-relational databases, etc. And we will soon have one more 101 session for storage and databases. And we also discussed about the traditional cloud abstractions such as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. And then we discussed a few newer cloud abstractions such as identity as a service, container as a service, serverless. And within serverless, we looked into function as a service, and also the newer trends such as no code or low code. And finally, we also looked into cloud deployment models such as public, private, and hybrid. So Cloud 101 was a very important session, especially for people who are completely out of IT. It was a bridge for you into IT or into cloud. And today we are stepping into Azure Cloud. So today's agenda, we'll be discussing about geographies, regions, availability zones, also region pairs, subscriptions and management groups, resources and resource groups, role-based access control, Azure Resource Manager, tags, and also a very important topic, Azure Active Directory, and also Azure AD roles. In the demo, we will see how Azure AD roles are different from RBAC roles, even though technically both of them are role-based access. But in Azure, we have two kinds of roles, one for managing Azure resources and one for managing Azure AD objects. So in case if anybody has skipped previous classes and then joining for this one directly, I am Hartin Kaniguthotu, and you can learn all about me from my GitHub pages resume, hartin.github.io. And I am a solutions architect, expert, DevOps engineer expert, and a Microsoft certified trainer. I have written few books and then got few awards also. So now let us start with the Azure core architectural components. So we will be discussing about geographies, regions, availability zone, data centers, etc., etc. Many people, when it comes to exams, get confused with all these terms. You have geographies, and within those geographies, you have regions. Regions contain availability zones, and availability zone contain data centers. Data centers contain the actual computer servers. Okay, this hierarchy you should keep in mind. So what are these geographies? So they are discrete markets that preserve data residency and compliance boundaries, typically contain two or more regions. allow customers with a specific data residency and compliance needs to keep their data and applications in close proximity, categorized as Americas, Europe, Asia Pacific, Middle East, Africa, etc. From an exam perspective, this is not needed, but a good information for you to have. But from here, everything is needed for working as well as for exams. So regions are made up of one or more data centers in close proximity. I'm not talking about what data centers are because we already discussed about them in Cloud Computing 101. But again, just search in Google for Azure data centers, then you will get an idea about how these data centers look like. They provide flexibility and scale to reduce customer latency. So if your resources are deployed within a region, you'll get better latency or low latency compared to resources deployed in two different regions. And also, you can select regions based on where you reside and get a better latency. But when I say better latency, it is low latency. And also, if for cost reasons, if you deploy into a data center that is in a different region or a faraway region, then you have services that can help you reduce that latency. Can somebody tell me a service name that can reduce such latencies? Yes, CDN, Content Delivery Network. So preserve data residency with a comprehensive compliance offering. Sometimes you may have some restrictions as my data should reside only within a particular geography. And data centers in a region may be grouped into availability zones if the region supports availability zone. So we saw in the previous slide, right? We have region. Within regions, we have availability zones. And within availability zones, we have data centers. There are two kinds of regions. Regions that support availability zones and regions that do not support availability zones. Whenever you go and try to deploy your virtual machine, you will see two kinds of regions. One will have the recommended heading, as you can see here. One set will have other heading. The ones with the recommended heading will have an availability zone support, or there's a plan for having availability zone support in near future. But for the other ones, there is currently no plan for availability zones. Okay, and other features may also be limited with the other ones. So always go for the recommended unless you have a very specific complaints or other reason to go with the other one. So one quick assignment for you. How many regions are there in Azure currently? Region pairs. Region pairs are kind of a very innovative idea that Azure follows. So every region has a pair. North Central US has South Central US. East US has West US. West US 2 has West Central US. I think the only case where it is not clearly within the same geography is the last one, Brazil South and South Central US. But otherwise, everything falls in the same geography, or to be more specific, same country. So what are these region pairs? They have at least 300 miles of separation between them, which makes sure that any local natural calamity has less effect on both of them. For some services, if you have enabled cross-region replication or geo-redundancy, then your data will be automatically replicated into your paired region. And in case of an outage, imagine that all of Azure's data centers are down due to whatever reason. Azure will prioritize region recovery. So at least one of these pairs will be recovered before the other set is recovered. So if you have data replicated across your region pairs, it is very likely that your services will be up and running soon. And finally, updates are also rolled out sequentially to minimize downtime. Imagine if Azure has to do some kind of update, they will not do to both the regions in a region pair at the same time. They will do to one of them make sure it is fine, and then they will do to the other one. So at least one of these regions will be up and running most of the time. You also have this concept of update and fault domains. Update domains allow Azure to perform incremental or rolling upgrades across a deployment. During a planned maintenance, only one update domain is rebooted at a time. Fault domains are a group of virtual machines that share a common set of hardware switches that share a single point of failure. Even within a data center, you have different racks, right? All of those racks might be plugged into power at a single point. So all of those racks can be considered as fault domain. If you have deployed across at least two fault domains, then even if one of those rack goes, your data is still available in the other rack. And if you need more availability, then you have to go with something such as availability zones and all, where you will be replicating data across data centers. So when you say fault domain, it could be within a data center, and different data centers are in most cases, or different availability zones are anyway different fault domains. VMs in an availability set. So we have something called as availability set, which we will see in the next slide mostly. We have not heard about availability set until now, right? We talked about something called as region. We talked about availability zones within those regions, and we also talked about data centers within availability zones. Availability set is a alternative to availability zones, but here the availability options are limited to a data center or limited to a availability zone. So you can configure max fault domain as 3 and max update domain as 20. And the update domain count must be 1. So this is a special case rule. Just in case if somebody asks, you can answer. The update domain count must be 1 when fault domain count is 1. So if you try to play around in portal, you will get that error. What are availability zones? So they are physically a separate data centers within the same region. Each data center is equipped with independent power, cooling, and networking, and they are connected through a private fiber optic networks. They provide protection against downtime due to data center failure. Okay, so you have Azure region and you have availability zones. If your Azure region supports availability zones, you will have 3 availability zones. Within an availability zone, you can have an availability set that makes use of these fault domains and update domains. So if you say that I want 2 fault domains and 5 update domains, then all of your virtual machines will be allocated to this by Azure itself. And what is availability set? As I mentioned, it is a logical grouping of VMs that allows Azure to understand how your application is built to provide redundancy and availability. So you just add virtual machines to an availability set, and Azure assign an update domain and fault domain automatically. You don't have to do anything. You have to create this availability set, define how many fault domains I need, how many update domains I need. So here in this picture, I have put the maximum so that you will not forget what is the maximum number of fault domains or update domains. But in most cases, you will not need this many fault domains or update domains. 2 and 5 is something that we commonly use. Okay, there is a question: can 2 data center in a region can be made as a availability zone? In general, Azure do not give you that guarantee of whether a single availability zone will have 1 data center or 2 data center. That is why you do not have an option to actually choose a data center, but you only have granularity up to choosing a availability zone or availability set. But a availability zone can have 2 data centers. That is a probability. But you don't have that option to do anything from your side. You have option to select a region. You have option to select availability zone. You have option to create and select availability set. So if somebody asks you, I want my services to be up and running, even if a single data center fail, then you cannot say that, okay, I will deploy into 2 data centers, but you should instead say, I will deploy into 2 availability zones. And this is just one example of availability options. I hope you know about the nines of availability concept. Most of these availabilities are mentioned in nines of availabilities like 99.9 or 99.995 or 99.99, etc., etc. So with a single VM and with premium storage, you have 99.9% SLA. And with 2 or more instances in an availability set, you get 99.95% SLA. If you have VMs with availability zone, then you get a 99.99% SLA. It provides protection from entire data center failures, something to remember seriously for exams also. And multi-region with disaster recovery. Hope you remember the difference between fault tolerance and disaster recovery from Cloud 101. So within a region, services continuing to run even if a data center fails is fault tolerance. And disaster recovery is when the whole region goes down and then your services become up and running in the other region, mostly paid region. So there is a question, 2 or more VMs are available in availability set, right? These are the copies of one VM. Yes. Then only in all these cases, you are replicating your VMs. And only then if one goes, the other can work, right? Okay, there is a question, what is the difference between availability zone and availability set? So availability zone, each availability zone has its own data centers. An availability set is within a availability zone. So it could be different racks within the same data center. In availability sets could be different racks within the same data center. Answer one question. If I want to make sure that even if a data center is gone, my services should be up and running, should I go with availability set or availability zone? Availability zone. So availability zone spreads across data centers, and availability set is within a availability zone. Actually, I should have gone in a different order. I should have talked about Azure Active Directory. Okay, so there is something called as Azure Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory is a service, and whenever you create an Azure account, an instance of that Azure Active Directory service will be created. That instance is generally referred to as a tenant, or it may be also referred to as a directory. We will see about it a little bit later today itself. So when you create an Azure account, you get a tenant or you get a directory. You can call it in whatever ways you want. And then can you deploy any Azure services? No. So this is where Azure is kind of different from other cloud providers such as AWS. In AWS, whenever you create an AWS account, you provide your credit card and link your credit card with that AWS account. But in Azure, whenever you are creating a tenant or a directory, you don't have to give a credit card or payment mechanism. But sometimes when you create for the first time, automatically a subscription will be also created. In that case, you'll have to provide your credit card information or any payment information. But in general, the cost for your Azure services is not linked to your Azure tenant or Azure directory. It is linked to something called as Azure subscriptions. Within your Azure account, within your Azure directory or tenant, you will have to create a subscription before you can deploy Azure resources. And this subscription, this subscription will be associated with some kind of a payment mechanism. Okay, so there is a question, what is a tenant? What is a tenant in real world? In an apartment complex, you'll have a lot of houses. Some of these, in some of these owners may be staying, in some of these tenants may be staying. So these tenants take that house for rent, and then they pay monthly rent to the owner. Similarly, in Azure also, you create create an instance of this service called Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory is a service that is used for identity and access management. For authorization to Azure services, you have another kind of role called RBAC roles. And also, there are some advanced concepts like once you have Office 365 subscriptions, it is also linked to tenant. And in general, every organization will have one tenant. One of the many reasons for having one tenant per organization is because you associate your domain with your tenant. So if your company name is Trainso and you have a domain trainso.com, employees needs email admin at trainso.com or courses at trainso.com or IT at trainso.com, then you need to actually register or associate your custom domain trainso.com to this tenant, and you can only associate with a single tenant. And most organizations will have only one email. Some organizations have multiple tenants, mostly because of acquisitions, but they will find a way to migrate things. So in summary, there is something called as Azure AD service. You can create instances and it will be automatically created whenever you create a Azure account. And within those tenants or directories, you can have multiple subscriptions. And these subscriptions are where you associate some form of payment mechanism. We will have a specific session on all these payment mechanisms. But in summary, can you tell me what are the different ways in which you can pay Azure? When you go to portal, you can pay through a credit card. Or you can go through a reseller called Azure CSPs or Microsoft partners. So you can go through Microsoft partners, and then you'll be paying the partner, and then you have more options, not just credit card. You can pay through other options also. Or you may have an enterprise plan, or you may be buying a product. For example, you may be buying a Visual Studio subscription, and then based on the type of Visual Studio subscription, you will get some credits. And for utilizing those credits, you will be getting a subscription. With the professional, I believe you get a $50 credit. With the enterprise, you get a $150 credit per month. And as long as you are not using more than this given 50 or given 150, you don't need to add a credit card. But if you need to use more, you will need to add a credit card. So Azure subscription primarily acts as a billing boundary. And in addition to billing boundary, Azure subscriptions also act as a access control boundary. So this is where the RBAC comes, role-based access control. We can have various different roles. The popular ones are one owner. Owner means you have all permissions. And then you have a contributor. Contributor means you have permissions to do anything and everything except giving permissions to others. Then you have reader permission, which allows you to only read but not make any modifications. And then you have all service specific permissions. Example is virtual machine contributor. And for various different use cases, you can create different subscriptions. Like for dev, you can create dev subscription, prod subscription, test subscription, and then give write permissions to different groups or people. And as you will see later, subscriptions are not the only place where you can have access control boundary. There are three more other in this hierarchy, and Azure AD is not one of them. So we will see them one step at a time. So this is just a sample subscription page. I will show you again in my portal later. So you have, so this pay as you go subscription is a subscription, Visual Studio Enterprise subscription I was telling, right? Subscription which do not need a credit card. Whenever you buy a Visual Studio Enterprise license, you get this along with it, and you can use until that limit is expired. And if you need to add a new subscription, you click on the add option. So you go here, you see this add option, right? So when you click on add, it will ask you to select an offer. So I have used my free trial offer a long time back. But if you have not created an Azure account yet, you will be eligible for a free trial. So if you have not created before, then you can select free trial. And in most cases, whenever you create your Azure account for first time, you'll automatically be creating a free trial also. Or the common one is the pay as you subscription. Or you can have a Azure for students subscription. Then Azure Pass sponsorship subscription, Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, EMPN. There are a lot of things you just explore. So I've not put all of these in the screenshot here. I'll show them when we go to a portal. Azure or any cloud, you can have various different types of resources. This is not the complete list, just few examples. And as you have gone through the Cloud Computing 101 session, tell me one thing. Virtual machines, is it IaaS or PaaS or serverless? IaaS. Okay, what about storage accounts? Is it IaaS or PaaS or serverless? What about virtual networks? And what about app services? Okay, app services is PaaS. And what about Azure SQL database? It is also PaaS. What about Azure Functions? It is serverless. And what about Logic Apps? So Logic Apps also in Azure, it is put under serverless. It comes under this category called no code or low code. And before we proceed, there is a question from Jenny. What is Visual Studio Enterprise subscription? So you have various IDs, right? If you are a developer, you will use some kind of ID. And most of the .NET developers use an ID called Visual Studio. If to use this ID, you need to have a subscription. Along with that subscription, you will get access to Visual Studio, as well as you will get some other benefits. Okay, if time permits, at a later point of time, I will show you that Visual Studio subscriptions page. You'll get a lot of benefits, like you'll get the code magazine, you'll get a few other things also. But the core product is an IDE, just like Eclipse or IntelliJ. This is an IDE mostly people use for .NET based applications. So then we have resource groups. Resource group is a container to manage and aggregate resources in a single unit. The important thing to understand here is that a resource group is a logical group. Resources can exist only in one resource group at a time. Resources can exist in different regions. Resources can be moved to different resource groups. Applications can utilize multiple resource groups. There is no restriction that I can only use one resource group. And also, when you create a resource group, it is also tied to a region. You'll have some metadata to be stored, but that doesn't restrict the location of the resources within that resource group. And resource groups are another access control boundary. So we learned one access control boundary, right? Which is subscriptions. So there is a question, can you elaborate on last point? So applications can utilize multiple resource groups. So basically, if I have an application and I can use resources from more than one resource group. Okay, I'm not restricted to only one resource group. I can have or I can use resources belonging to multiple resource groups. I assume you are referring to applications that are deployed. Okay, so applications that are deployed in a Azure environment. Maybe a virtual machine, maybe Azure App Services, somewhere. Even in that case, application can be in one resource group and it can access resources in other resource group. There is no such restrictions. And when it comes to identity and access management, there are a lot more advanced topics you will have to learn, like system identities, managed identities, a lot of things. Don't worry about those things. And we will learn all of them in coming days. If you have multiple subscriptions and you need to give some permissions across those subscriptions, You can group those subscriptions using something called as management groups. Management groups group multiple Azure subscriptions. Subscriptions inherit conditions applied to the management group. And few numbers. 10,000 management groups can be supported in a single directory. Directory, you know, right? The tenant. A management group tree can support up to 6 levels of depth. You can have a management group. Inside that, you can have another management group. Inside that, you can have a subscription. The depth can be up to 6 levels. Basically, you can also nest management groups, but none of the other things, such as subscriptions or resource groups or even resources, you can nest. What do you mean by nest? Creating an item of same type inside that item. Here, creating a management group inside a management group is called as nesting. Clear? So this is the hierarchy. You have management groups, you have subscriptions, you have resource groups, and you have resources. So if you give permissions at management group level, then it will be applicable to all subscriptions under that management group. And subsequently, it will be also applicable to all resource groups under all those subscriptions and all resources under all those resource groups. In all these 4 places, you can provide permissions to access Azure resources. And that is called as role-based access control, or RBAC. You get fine-grained access management. You can segregate duties within the team and grant only the amount of access to users that they need to perform their jobs. I talked about 3 popular ones, right? Or the top level ones: owner, contributor, reader. In general, you don't have to give those things. You can give whatever specific permissions at a granular level. For example, if he is only going to manage virtual machines, why should he be given an owner or contributor? He can be just given virtual machine contributor. So you will not be able to do anything else other than working with virtual machines. Similarly, you can enable access to the Azure portal and control access to resources. Okay, so you get a lot of control with RBAC. And there is also one more that we will see later, which is Azure AD roles. Azure AD roles are for managing Azure AD objects, such as users or groups, anything specific to Azure AD. There is a question, is a management group same as ARM? No. Management group is just a group of subscriptions. Okay, we will see ARM also shortly. Okay, so this is a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription homepage. So you see this access control IAM tab, right? On the left. The same tab you will be able to see if you go to a management group or a resource group or even a resource. And then you can add roles. So owner, contributor, reader, ACR delete, ACR image signer, and then you can scroll down and you can see a lot more granular ones. Somebody was asking about Azure Resource Manager, right? So it is actually a management layer that enables you to create, update, delete resources in your Azure subscription. Basically, whatever you do or whatever you want to do with your Azure resources, you go through this layer called Azure Resource Manager. So there are different ways in which you can talk to Azure. Examples include Azure Portal, Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, REST clients, SDKs. What are SDKs? SDK stands for Software Development Kit. Different programming languages will have their own SDKs. .NET C# will have an SDK. Java will have an SDK. Python will have an SDK. JavaScript will have an SDK. Basically, irrespective of how you interact with Azure, all of these goes through this single layer called ARM. And it will be easy for Azure also to implement authentication related things at one layer rather than everywhere else, right? And ARM also provides a template called ARM templates. And using that, you can declaratively provision your resources. Okay, it is a JSON template. You can define what all things you need and then you deploy it. The advantage is that you can provision it again and again. Going to portal and creating it will take time each and every time, right? So this you can reuse. you have something called as the tags. What are these tags? Tags provides metadata for your Azure resources. It is just a key value pairs. So you can tag that, okay, this resource belongs to this department. You can have a tag, okay, department A1 or D1, department D2. So it is just a key value pair, right? And later, you can use these tags for a lot of purposes. And one of the most important use case is for rolling up billing information. You can calculate. I will show these things in the cost session. But in summary, you can just calculate, okay, what is the cost due to this department, what is the cost due to that department, just by filtering based on tags. They are just key value pairs. And one more thing not remembering is that if you are applying tags on a resource group, will the resources automatically get those tags? Yes or no? No. Okay, so the resources will not get those tags, or in other terms, tags are not inherited like permissions. So if you are setting a permission or if you are setting a lock, locks we will see later in another session, you will inherit those. So you have the hierarchy, right? Management group, subscription, resource group, resource. If you are assigning some permissions, they are inherited, but tags, they are not inherited. But you can make tags to be inherited using other things or other features such as Azure policies and all. Again, something we will see later. I assume all of you know the difference between authentication and authorization. Authentication is checking who you are. Authorization is checking what you can do. Basically, authentication asks for your username or password, or sometimes a multi-factor authentication, where you will be asked more than one thing. Like one thing will be username and password, another thing could be a key or a number that is sent to your mobile, or you may be using an authentication app. Sometimes you will be using biometrics. So in case of authentication, in general, we say the system will ask you something you know. Example is password. Something you have, your phone, and something you are, which is biometric. And what about authorization? Authorization is checking whether you are allowed to do an operation. So first authentication happens, and then when you try to do something, authorization happens. And Azure Active Directory is an identity and access management service that is available from Microsoft. You can use it with more than just Azure. You can use it with other Microsoft products also. It provides authentication. Employees sign in to access resources. You can have a single sign-on. You can have application management. You can have business to business customers. You can have business to consumer identity services. You can have a device management. For companies, under device management, there are two options: one joint resources or joint devices, and one registered devices. How many of you have heard about this concept called as BYOD? It is bring your own device. So sometimes company will give you the laptop, or sometimes it will allow you to bring a laptop. When company is giving you a laptop, you generally join the device, and then the company will have more access to those devices. When you are bringing your own devices, you may not want to give all permissions to company. You'll give limited permissions through registering. Don't worry about these things. You'll be learning all these things in advanced sessions. Fundamentals is all about understanding what is there. And advanced sessions like 104 or 305 or other sessions are about telling you how to use those features or services. And one thing to keep in mind, Azure Active Directory is not just the cloud version of on-premises Active Directory. If you are a Active Directory administrator, remember that Azure Active Directory is not just the cloud version of it. It is a product redesigned from scratch, focusing on cloud. There are also a lot of restrictions for syncing user data from or between your Active Directory and Azure AD. You can only sync from one direction from AD to Azure AD, but not the other way. The only thing you can do it the other way is password write back, and that too if it is enabled. And you also have something called as Azure AD roles. These roles are used to manage Azure AD objects. Examples include a global administrator, user administrator, etc. You may not have to learn all these things in depth, but you need to have a proper understanding of these things. Some of these things, especially advanced things, may be needed only for some certifications such as SC 900 or SC 300, which focus only on identity and access management. But you need to understand what all things are there and the core terms and terminology. So now comes the main demo. So once you log into your Azure portal, you will be seeing a screen like this, and based on whatever services you have used, they will come up in recent resources and all. So I'm not going to click on any of those, because any service you can search here or any feature. So let us start with Azure Active Directory. So if I search for Azure Active Directory, it will give you option to go to Azure Active Directory. And within Active Directory, I can check my users, or I can check my groups. I can have external identities. I can have roles and administrators. I can have administrative units. And also I can add a user group. If I try to add a user, I have two options. I can create a normal user, which is the normal Azure Active Directory user. And then I can give a name, say Hartin, and then I can have a, okay, it is there. So I give some other name. Then I can select a domain. So since I have not added any custom domain, it will show me the default domain. The default domain will be something of this kind .onmicrosoft.com. You can definitely add a custom domain. And then you also have an option, and then you can scroll down, and then if you want to add that user to a group, or you can provide some roles for that user, you can have the login or sign in blocked. You can restrict that user to a particular location. You can also give a title, department, company name, etc., and then also select a manager. Another option is invite a user. With invite to user option, this is also referred to as the B2B. So with this option, you can invite people from other places, and you only have to provide an email. With invite user, you can give a name like before, and here you can give any email. You don't have to provide an email that ends with your custom company domain. You can give a Gmail or Outlook or whatever you want, you can give, and that person will get an invite, and then they will join as a guest user. Then you can, other options are almost similar to what you saw for created user. Okay, with create user, you create within your Active Directory. Invite user, you invite somebody from outside and give them access. And there is also one more kind of Azure Active Directory called Azure Active Directory B2C. Okay, so if you try to create a tenant, so if you go to manage tenants, and if you try to create a tenant, you get two options, Azure Active Directory and Azure Active Directory B2C. So within this Azure Active Directory, you can have a normal Active Directory users, or you can have B2B users. So irrespective of what user it is, they will have access to manage your Azure resources, like virtual machines. So irrespective of whether it is a regular Active Directory user or a B2B user, it does not matter. You will be managing Azure resources. And you also have another type of tenant called B2C. This one, B2C, is for managing your application uses. Imagine that you are creating an application. That application will definitely need users, right? So for example, our cloud rigs or trains or portal. So you will have users. So these users may not have to manage Azure resources, but they will have other functions as a student or as a teacher. So such users you can use within Azure Active Directory B2C. And another difference is that if you select this guy and go to next configuration, you will need to provide a organization name, an initial domain name, .microsoft on Microsoft.com, then a country or region. But if you select this B2C one, you will have the same options on top, but below you will also need to select a subscription and also a resource group, just like any other resources. If you have more than one tenants or if you have more than one directories, how do you switch between them? You can go to the top right corner and then you can go to switch directory. And then you can select which one you want to switch to. Okay, so I think that this CloudRix may be a B2C domain. So I can click on switch and it will take me through. You can just click on switch and it will take me to the other directory. Okay, here, if I go to Azure Active Directory, I will not see anything useful. And here I will have to go to Azure AD B2C. Here I will have a lot of options to manage users for my custom application. So let us quickly go back to my default directory. So the first directory is generally called as the default directory. And Azure AD roles. So these roles, I am a global administrator, and these roles are mostly used for managing your Azure Active Directory objects. So all these users, groups, all these things you can manage if you have right Azure AD permissions. So now let us go to subscriptions. So if you go to a subscription, then here you have access control IAM. You can click on access control IAM. And then if you click on add role assignment, then you can see all these different roles and then you can choose the right one. And if I go to a resource group, so if I search for resource groups, then I see all my resource groups. If I go inside this resource group and click on access control IAM and click on add, same I can see here also. And then if I search for management groups, it will show you my hierarchy. So the root is always called a tenant root group. Inside that I have 2 subscriptions. I have created other management groups, but I have not moved my subscriptions there. But if you go to any of these management groups, there also you will get this access control IAM. And when you click on add, it is going to be same. And finally, if you go to any resource, and then there also you'll get this access control IAM and again same. Okay, so we can have these at various different layers. And if you try to create a resource such as a virtual machine, then you can see the other things that we saw. In any case, whenever you create a resource, the first thing is selecting a subscription and then selecting a resource group or I can create one on the go. Then I can give any name. Then I can select a region. So if you see the recommended option, and you have also the other option. So if I select this recommended option, I'll have availability options. Under that, I have availability zone, I have scale set, I have availability set. And if I select something from other, so I don't have availability zone anymore. I have only the other options. Then I have option to select other things also, which is not very relevant for today's session, but you can play around if you really want. There is a question, recommend option filter based on our current location. No, recommend is based on, so this recommend, if you are referring to this recommend, if you click here, choose these locations for the broader set of Azure products and long-term capacity growth. Basically, it says these are stable locations with availability zones and all those features. A location can be selected based on many other factors. You will see cost is also one of those factors when we go to the cost module. But this is more of how advanced or how stable that location is. And most of the recommended ones have all availability options. Okay, so rest of the things we will see with cost and other things. And if you go to this, we will go to a better one, Istios. And if you go under availability options, if you select availability zone, then you can select whether I want to go with zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. And this zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3 for different customers may be different. And also, if you go to availability set, then you can select. So currently I don't have any availability set, so I can create a new one. And then I can give a name, and then I can select how many fault domains I need to give. I can increase up to 3. And also how many update domains I can increase up to 20. And as I mentioned, if you put it at 1, you will get this thing, update domain count must be 1. When fault domain count is 1, all are happy. And once you create like your resource group, you can select it here. Okay, I know it's been a lot of things, but these are the core things in Azure. And do participate in the live quizzes that will happen on various days. You'll get a notification. And these quizzes will be focusing on all these topics. So it is a way to learn with a little bit of fun. Okay, so you can participate in quizzes, come on top, and if you have doubts, then ask, and make sure you are clear about all these concepts and topics. So this was your first Azure class after Cloud Computing 101. Are you able to follow Azure, or are you able to understand how Azure Cloud work from an architecture perspective? So now you'll be learning more about services that are available in Azure and other things. When cost, a lot of other things are there. Okay, good. So please make sure you actively participate, especially if you are part of the crash course. Even people who are a part of regular course can also participate as part of the crash course. And next 45 days from yesterday, so there is half of April and full of May. Put all of your effort and then try to become better Azure engineers. And always be active, ask doubts, and attend quizzes. And also, you will also have to take some sessions to improve your communication skills. It is okay if you are not able to understand everything or remember everything just from one session. That is why you'll have access to recordings. Try to listen to it again whenever you have free time. All of you may not have a photographic memory, so you may have to go through the recordings again and again, practice quizzes again and again, and get better. So that's it. We'll wind up now. And it was nice talking to you on this Easter day. Happy Easter to all of you. And then we will continue our classes. So there is a question, is there an app available for Trainso? Yes, definitely. The app is not called Trainso. It is called Kajabi. You can go to App Store or Play Store and search for this app called Kajabi. And then log in with the same email that you have registered in Trainso portal. Every day we may have a session or a quiz, some activity will be there. So some of these quizzes will be conducted by our interns. Tomorrow evening, 9 p.m., please come prepared, Cloud Computing 101, and then attend the quiz. And at any point of time, if you have doubt, just feel free to ask. Because this is the first time we are doing a 45-day crash course. Until now, it is only 4 to 6 months of Forum CE. So bye-bye for now. See you all in next class.